My name is Sandy Meek, and I teach poetry here. I'm the creative writing coordinator, and I'm happy to welcome you to this wonderful poetry reading and to introduce to you Curry Teams, who will be introducing to you our poet, Curry.
Hello everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to today's reading. Following the reading, we will have time for a Q&A, and then there will be a book sale and signing in the back of the chapel. My name is Curry Teams, as Dr. Meek said, and I am a senior creative writing student here. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to the visiting poet, C.M. Burroughs. An associate professor at Columbia College, Chicago, Burroughs is the author of two poetry collections, The Vital System and Master Suffering, the latter of which was longlisted for the National Book Award in 2021, and a finalist for both the LA Times Book Award and the Lambda Book Award. She has also received grants and fellowships throughout her career from the Otto Jarosky Foundation, McDowell Colony, Virginia Center for Creative Arts, and Kage Common Foundation. Burroughs' poetry has appeared in many journals and anthologies, including Poetry Magazine, Callaloo, Volt, and Best American Experimental Writing Anthology. Not to mention, except I will, both the Studio Museum of Harlem and the Warhol Museum have commissioned her to create poetry in conversation with and in response to art installations. The title, Master Suffering, is an axis for understanding the collection itself. Is it an instruction or a designation? Are we asked to master suffering, or are we told that suffering masters us? Burroughs' poignant collection of poems hinges on the body, both the self and other, navigating sex, grief, religion, and the suffering that haunts these concepts that are central to human existence, and more specifically, the feminine existence. Burroughs invites the reader into the narrative early in the book, saying, "It is female, it is girl parts, ready to suffer, ready to try to live." She conflates womanhood with pain throughout this book, whether it is through domestic action like cleaning the house and a man, equating the seeker's value with her functional use. As Burroughs says in the first poem in a series titled Incidents for the Forgettery, "I am welcome for my utility, how I might serve, my southern grace having blown me toward the tool of necessity." But cleaning is also equated to a masterful art, offering control. In basic training, we are regaled with the sensory experience of the action of cleaning the house. Burroughs writes, "Task-turned meditation, my introversion summons space and redundant duties in the house. I could set my mind to changing a thing and it would change." Burroughs explores how an action can be associated with pain and suffering at the hands of others, yet the same action can be owned, taken possession of, and become gratifying in the process. Master Suffering also explores this idea through the lens of sexual relationships and the narrator's understanding and even appreciation of her own body. Throughout this first part, many poems explore the feminine experience of not having ownership over one's own body and becoming an object for ownership. In part one of the book, in a poem titled Questions During Protest, Burroughs writes that the questions are rhetorical and involve ownership. He possesses everything, his body and mine. However, by the end of the book, in Elegy for a Server, we see the subject of this poem finding joy and freedom from these tiny boxes through self-exploration, leading her to a bodily redemption. Burroughs writes, "She calls on her own body, herself is the one she needs, and she knows the softness of palm under white. She knows what it tastes like to taste her." Much like this poem, the book illuminates bodily redemption and freedom from the constraints set on the narrator, as the last section of this collection explores the distancing from ideas presented at the beginning of this book about women's bodies. Burroughs uses the body as a framing device for much of the suffering in the book, but perhaps the most emotionally resonant is the death of her sister and the years-long depression following. In the second poem, titled Incidents for the Forgettery, Burroughs writes, "My sister's body would be felled by a ruinous liver the size of my palm and positively killing a whole person whom I had spent my life loving and protecting." The central sentiment of this collection of poems centers around the suffering of grief, the normalcy and the extremes. This book outlines the almost palpable, immensely powerful journey of mourning the loss of her sister. We follow the speaker of these poems through the pain of watching her sister's body fail, a shortened goodbye for fear of selfishness, all the way to the other side where the pain becomes unbearable and the questions are aimed toward God. Prefacing a series of poems titled God Letter, Burroughs writes in Dear Liver that God became further debatable. Through the end of part 2, these poems present a battle of belief in the darkness of grief and depression, asking the question, why would you put so much sadness in one person? Do you know what the dark looks like and that it has its own gravity? In the end, the collection's engagement with suffering is neither an instruction nor a designation. Rather, Burroughs seems to suggest that salvation comes not from denying suffering or asserting dominance over it, but seems to rest in the liminal space that embraces both self-ownership and shared satisfaction. The poems in the collection invite readers to witness pain, yet some demand interpretation, presenting a mix of straightforward storytelling and enigmatic complexity. Collectively, the poems draw readers into a pendulum of intimacy, where suffering is both deeply personal and unavoidably shared. This theme is particularly evident in the final poem, To Be Saved, which, like many other poems in this collection, is open to interpretation, though its use of the pronoun he suggests a shift toward a more communal understanding of the dichotomy of suffering and salvation. Burroughs shows signs of salvation in the last line, saying, "We are always gasping and awakening." Please welcome now, C.M. Burroughs.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right, that was a gorgeous introduction. Thank you so very much. I'm going to start today by reading from my first collection, The Vital System, because it opens up the mythology of who I am. This poem rests on my having been born 3 months early. Dear Incubator, at 6 months gestation, I'm a fabrication born far too soon. My body, a stone in a steaming basket. I remember you, figureless, a black kaleidoscope. Turn, turn, the dangerous loom of the loom of you, patterns pressing upon me inside. Nothing luminous as my mother's womb. This second attempt at formation, a turn. The nurse slides her wedding band past my hand, beyond my elbow and over my shoulder. I am 1 pound, 12 ounces, and already feminine, knowing nothing of it. I'm trying to be clear. I was first fascinated and afraid of the shapes rise from your darkness and their growth toward me. I wailed under their weight. My eyes were shuttered by lids. My skin was translucent. Anyone could see me working. How can I ask you from inside the poem? What senses did I have so early, so unformed? I was tangled in tubes. They kept my heart pumping. They kept my lungs from collapsing. Food to the body, oxygen to the brain. You were everything and nothing. A surrogate. A packaging of half-made sensory detail, a past. I have scars on my belly in shapes of fish, where sensors tore thin skin. What a tragedy to be powerless. And yet I control the choreography of everyone around me, the check of vitals, arms through the arm ports, my parents' speech. Also, there were surgeons. I'm trying to tell you something important about after they opened you and took me out. I was infected, could command nothing of my legs for months. The surgeons, thin blades shining into nothing. Imagine the cuts, blood spread along the lip of each, spilling as my skin parts, someone bringing cotton to catch it. Is it your fault? I don't know. I was in a state. I've explained. I don't know what you let in. Perhaps. Do you know lovers ask about these scars, touch these raised scars? So much has happened. I'm black. I have a dead sister. I love you, but and believe this, I mostly want to talk. The class I visited earlier was interested in this next piece, so I'll read it for them.
body as a juncture of almost. It is female. It is girl parts, ready to suffer, predilection for, ready to try to live. I tell it, how I became what I am, not forgiving of myself, but forgetting the irrational start. Why should I have wanted so much as to threaten my being? Refusal to recall what I was, the impossibility of this. For 3 months captured in a clear box. Look, the clear box. My trying to be. Self that I own. I own her, at least. 2. Joy is a syllable down the causeway yet unlit. The speakers keep saying it is so. Argue, say, capture her and her in the midst of gesture, between desire and satisfaction. See, stutter of woman, breast and bone between wanting to have and having, the irrevocably wrote discomfort between. 3. I want you to understand what this bracket feels like. Be an active participant in a difficult narrative of body. Fit your body into the bracket. 4. Are you reading what I'm handing you? My body, hinged to the other, hyphen. Do you think about her kneecaps and arched spine, her navel and clavicle, her whole? Do you want to look inside? 5. I don't want you to hurt, but watch her, understand what it is. Watch her arc through pain to, is it pleasure, something from which she doesn't want to run, stay put in, meter of organ and sense. What now it feels like to be touched, like this, again, like this. 6. Watch her, look at me. So much a woman now, parabola and experience, muscles at ease with want and its yield. You will need so much empathy to feel her feeling. So as Curry said, this book is based on my loss of my younger sister 26 years ago now. She was ill for most of her life. She died at 11. She had a liver transplant and had one marvelous, healthy, beautiful year. And then her body rejected the liver a year on, and we lost her. So this is a book that thinks through my grief, that loss, and what role spirituality had to do in it all, among other things. All right. Basic training. I learned to clean house at age 10 under the instruction of a U.S. Marine, my father, teaching me that a job worth doing was a job worth doing well. Task-turned meditation, my introversion summoned space and redundant duties of house, ritual rescuing of counters under the day's crumb, esophageal kicks of the hoover in hand, hypnotic polishing of torchères, side tables, and talons from the hands and feet of mahogany chairs. Lastly, I could sit and survey my balancing song. It was gratifying. I could set my mind to changing a thing, and it would change. I have a few series of poems in this book. One of them is Incidents for the Forgettery. As I was writing, I decided there must be a place where you can put things that you'd rather not remember. So, the Forgettery. After I scour the kitchen to the alleys of the stove, ring and hang the wash, disappear the garbage, bleach the bath, perfect the bed its strict corners, he says, it's nice to have another adult around, which resonates to the effect of, you are particular skin I want to assuage, as in won't you stay with me forever. What I miss here is the objective hue of his voice, its inflection signifying the wonder he holds for a woman's functional use. I am welcome for my utility, how I might serve, my southern grace having grown me toward the necessity of a tool. That relationship didn't last very long. You can't be with someone who takes you for granted. All right. Incidents for the forgetter. My sister's body would be felled by a ruinous liver the size of my palm and positively killing a whole person whom I'd spent my life loving and protecting all the ways one young body can protect another. I wasn't always good, but I tried my best to barter after missteps, after hurting her good humor, and held her hand until she was old enough not to want me. If I could change anything, I would have taken her place, ushered her into syllable and verse. No liver would have laid her low. Or I would have plainly had her live, healthy from start to finish, free of any organ's gross intents. So another series is called Dear Liver, and because the liver was the organ that failed my sister essentially twice, I had some things to say. Dear Liver, grant that you are part of the capsule of her. You are integral to the system of her and have one function, to clean, which you were made for, which was assigned to you at the beginning of time. What can be said that will help you to understand the values of your labor? So much depends upon the figure you cut in the bantam cage of her body, yourself dwarfing every other meat. You are the namer of things, fitful when not fair, and decide what to refine, deterge, and tender back to blood. I look to you without looking. I apologize, my poor inner eye. Dear liver, how many times, once we knew the culprit, did we curse the bad liver of her birth, or the second, a gift, eager to escape the capsule of her? Double-lobed brute disrupting in plumes. Given all the prayers against the organ's recurrent failure, God became further debatable. The unbeliever. For the first time from my mouth I say, pray for us, assuming she gospels in a God and offering I do too. Trundled syllable, I am a con, cowed by the brute strength belief takes, sight unseen, grave bravery to count on invisible, untouchable men. Pray for us, from my most shallow pocket, knowing I need her faith to carry me. And who is it that trusts a whole body bears us out, its largest hands marbling unbelievers under multilingual incantations? Who is it that harbors kindling for the pastor's devoted mouth, mirrors the evergreen hunger of congregations' hands, giving up the body to be taken wholly elsewhere? Truth be told, there's no proof, just people borne back from half-light, from the optic nerve's most mischievous macular halos. There are no good answers for trauma, only he'll never give you more than you can bear, which is a bald-faced lie. He does, every day, failing stupid cacophonous to count. There's no good reason why, if he is to be believed, he will sweep his wand across the anathema to set it right. God letter. Everybody is doing trigger warnings now, so to whom it may concern, I hated God when my sister died. I didn't know it was coming, but we were at the hospital in a private room for family, and our pastor was there, the one who baptized me, and he said, let us pray. And I kept my eyes open to watch everybody, but listened. And when he said, sometimes God has to take back his angels, I was smart enough to know, I was 15, that he was saying she was gone, or going, and I loathed him so much, He didn't see the look on my face, that blazing anger, blink heart, F you forever look. But then my parents told me we were going to take her off of life support, and I died then. And after they took away the machines, we had solitude, family time, the 5 of us, mom, dad, me, my brother, and my sister. Holding her body, she was warm. She wasn't conscious, but she could hear us, I know it. Then they opened the door for other family to say goodbye, and I was hugging her back in her bed, my face against her face, my tears wetting her cheek, it was flush, and her waving hair. I wanted to hold her forever. I was hurting, but felt selfish, like other people wanted to say goodbye too, so I let go, and her head kind of tilted to the side, and I straightened it then, so it was a mess. Goodbye, goodbye. We left there to clean the house for mourners to come. Over time, I found that my 2 books speak to each other in subtle ways, so I'll read a poem from that. One of 2 ways. You jolted awake. Recall the exhausting day, the collapse into sleep, though a door slams and your teeth grind, or the couple next door arrive and fight and your ears raise on the first spit consonant. Dying happens just as your waking happens, but backward. You were struck beyond yourself, where focus comes or does not come. Or it is a Friday of geometric heat. Your body feels safe in the bucket seat of the family car. Your father drives from the second unforgettable landmark to the first, where you recognize who you will be alongside a gather of artifacts. That letter. I thought something was wrong with me. Dear God, I hid my grief, usually closed behind the door of my closet, but also under my covers at night, where I was sure to quiet my sobbing because I really quit composure and said, grief, go. And there it was, pulling me to myself, and I didn't talk about it. So in 5 years, then 8 passed, and I was still grieving, sometimes in the middle of the day or walking to work. I finally went to see someone, and though she wouldn't tell me for months, she would diagnose me with major depressive disorder, and I wouldn't believe it until I realized no one else in my family was still in so much pain, and I had thought about killing myself because I was so much inconsolable. Like the time I saw nothing in the road, then ran broadside into a bright red truck, totaling my car but walking away. Or one evening in the library parking lot where I escaped after dinner to weep. Or the time when I considered veering into the opposite lane, but thinking about those other people stopped me. And there I was, sobbing again for having considered it. And I went to my parents and said, I think something is wrong with me. I can't stop crying and think about killing myself. And they said, you have to get outside of yourself, which wasn't wrong. I had always been an introvert, but I would keep on the same way for years, through a therapist or 2, one who was a family friend and had known my sister, who had me pay for my sessions myself. I was 19, it was $1 per session for me to feel empowered in my healing, and he told me to hug my mother and tell her I love her, and I did. Why would you put so much sadness in one person? Do you know what the dark looks like, and that it has its own gravity? And how once I started taking antidepressants and finally felt normal sadness, I was amazed at my good mood, and amazed to know that people walk around every day only having this little bit of hurt. And against real depression, it is practically glee. And it has been years of pills, but I don't want to stop because I'm afraid of the low place, which only comes every blue moon. But it's still paralyzing. It feels like a thrumming, loud, louder, then unbearable once I am the noise with deathly thoughts. But if I say them out loud and weep, then it goes away within an hour or 2. And my partner wonders what it is doing to my kidneys, but he's rarely seen me when I can't get up, and he would feel helpless against the deluge and my saying, I don't know, when he asks, what is wrong? It is my brain. And he would have to watch me slope and be darkly. All right, y'all might identify with the first part of this God letter. Do I have to dress up or can I wear jeans? Dear Joaquin, casual Sunday is a plus. Can a woman be fully present in heels? No, not. Remember the other day at the shops, we saw the t-shirt, the red blessed across the front. I know you picked it up for me as a joke, but it made me pause. I think I am blessed in the way I understand people who mean it, having good fortune. But this is where faith messes with my clean concept, because practicing Christians don't believe blessings come out of the clear blue sky. So here's God again, all up in the Kool-Aid. I'm dating myself, but I mean, he gets in the way of spiritual minimalism. He's at once contained and uncontainable, which intellectually is hard to understand. So being blessed must require that one acts in such a way that presses God to bestow blessings, which isn't the same thing as good fortune. But I want to believe people are saying, you have such good fortune. I hope for good fortune too. Because it means that no one is preaching at me like, you have good God. Father God, I hope you God for us to go with God, etc. I'm warm. I know nothing. It's true that you forget the voice of your sister, and her smell, so imprinted, gets up in your dreaming, and Lethe's wake tide takes that too. Her absence wakes something blackly in you, and in the first months, worn clothes and enfolded necks of animals can be spread for her scent, hard inhalations of her having been. Sometimes we go about the house proving she existed through artifacts, including her hand and a lead script of notebooks. You see, she wasn't a dream, although time tries to make her that way. Before autopsy. To put my hands into her body will mean to be overcome, so that I am black, or all that I will say is black, because it hasn't a name. I am overcome because it is unnamed, and I want to call it. I call it, and want for it, him and rivet to come. I will suffer desire, suffer it. So we're in the South, so everybody ought to have heard the phrase, don't split the pole, right? Who hasn't heard it? Oh, that's good. Okay, Scott, look. Don't do it. Any pole, that pole, any pole. If you're walking with someone, if I'm walking with Sandy, let's go on the same side of the pole so we stay together, and always. Okay, so I'm going to read a poem about that very thing that I wrote for my mother, because she always taught me not to split the pole. And I've always heeded that advice. Supposition. Oh, and this song has allusions to the transatlantic slave trade too. Let us admit there has been division enough, our teeth its simplest actors. Let us admit the past, our translucent bodies' betrayal, good nature's good windows. We were, weren't we, movable, series of solid matters sected. Midlife and mothered historical warnings hum, don't split the pole, so as not to forget oneself, so as not to be beguiled by the menagerie present. For any seer, bisection percusses elemental tension, the yoke attention to see oneself and one's companion starkly on this side of the dividing line. If you split the pole, better to graft your error Better to right your route than to risk misfortune's unrelenting map. By the way, that's a nice phrase for teaching anyone alliteration. Have so many R's in that one. Better to right your route than to risk misfortune's unrelenting map. For your mother and her mother and hers. For the lot of us, the clot of us, regarding the unsteady water and familial gourds at our feet. Most beautiful thing. When I say I am patient, I mean that for some length of time I did not know myself, nor was I confident that I would be known. This was constantly my preoccupation, likely the preoccupation of any body in a natural state of peril. My reasons being, I came early to the world and might have died. I came early to the world and might have killed myself. I came early to the world, but missed my own passing. It took years to find. I am blessed, or impossibly fortunate. I feel the life of my dead sister filling me. I have seen myself through. 2 more poems. This one I'm about to read is a poem that really helped my grief. For years, when I wrote, it was always from the first person. I've lost, I feel, I miss, I. And this was the first poem I wrote in the second person while thinking about my sister's agency in passing away. She was the one who was sick for many years, right? She was the one who'd been through transplantation and rejection. So I wrote this poem, and it seemed to signify something different in my grieving process. A young girl and devoted attendant. You must have in your muscles a threshold of pain, said when the light, pole, or gracious hand appeared. Yes. First looked behind you to the macrame of tubers, rigs, and your body's openings that were made openings through which slender metal mouths sucked or spewed all the black, the sterilized tears, the life and lifelessness of that place. Must have looked on all it amounted, surveyed the wilt, rocked, measurable ravage, and looked away. What intelligent sickness. Rather, what is in front of you answers how the water and the wood bridge leading to the water signify a freedom only felt when going under. Count backward from 100. 100. 99. 98. It doesn't take what you think it takes to leave the body. What it requires is that you admit yourself, the bleak shelter of your body against the calm. 92. 91. Of what impresses your optic nerve, yourself, woundless, and saturating that desire, further corrected colors. And finally, to be saved. The signs begin incrementally. Smallly they plumb, then dilate under the skin as egg, so that we are forced to acknowledge each incident, sometimes very human, the body shepherding itself to the bathroom in the night and back again, gasping where a toe smashes into the bed's simple feet. For a moment, we wake to radiant pain opening as pure sound, sometimes very metal. There is worry that proliferates like operatic throats. Signs happen such that we are always gasping and awakening. Thank you. And it's question and answer time.
Did you have fixes on? Is that all down?
Yeah? Yes. Thank you. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll bring you the mic.
Hi. So I'm very interested as like a fellow poet
find yourself like writing the most poetry? Is it like you do it every day, like meditation? Is it like you write it out, or is it like when emotion moves you, like write it?
Okay, so when and why do I write?
Yeah.
Honestly, and I was telling this to the class earlier, I write in 2 large times a year. So I write in the summertime, and I write in the winter break. I'm a professor at Columbia College, Chicago, and with all my students' poems, I don't have time to write my own during the semester. So I use my time during the semester to read and to gather ideas for the poems that I'm planning to write. And I just keep it all up here and depend on whatever this is doing to save all my thoughts and notes. Yeah.
So for the 5th Godletter poem in Master Suffering, I noticed that when you state your age, in the book I have at least it says 16. When you read it, you said 15, and on mine it says 14. So I was curious, like, what's the reason for the different ages?
The reason that in memory I'm one age, in actuality I was another, and so 15 is the true age. And in the book, if there are things that I kind of want to correct due to history, right, facts, then I'll make those changes in readings. Yeah, so thanks for noticing that. Oh, they're all the way in the back.
I was really interested in so many of your poems are so personal, and I guess in your view of the role of the author in sharing your own personal stories to kind of the unknown audience who may or may not listen.
So one thing that's taught in poetry classes is be specific. And hardly anyone does it. They write very abstractly, and your professor, all they want you to do is be clear, be specific. And that's what I've done in these poems because, believe it or not, specificity will help the reader to empathize with you. And I have intention in these poems. I want to communicate what I was feeling clearly. And so I've got to be specific. And I'll tell you what, I divulge quite a bit in this book. And so it is personal in many senses, but there are also poems, so there's part of them that can exist outside of truth, and capital T truth. I did have a woman come up to me this was years ago, but I'd read some poems about the loss of my sister, and she said, well, how did your mother deal with it? And I said, well, we all shored up as a family. And she said, well, yeah, but how did your mother deal with it? I said, we shored up. And she said, well, yeah, but I have a friend who lost a child. I'm just wondering how your mother dealt with the loss of her daughter. And it was just a bit, there's a boundary there, right? So you have what the poem tells you, and then you have what you're asking of someone beyond the poem. And my friend, the poet Shannon Beatty, saw what was happening out of her periphery and kind of tugged me away and said, we have to go. So she gave me my easy exit. But I think if that conversation had persisted, I would have just said, ma'am, I'm sorry, I can't tell you more about what happened.
Other questions?
I'm curious what the process was like different between writing your first and your second book.
Say that one more time.
What was the process like? How was it different writing your first and your second books of poetry?
Sorry, there's nothing.
Is that last part between writing.
Your first and your second book?
Okay, thank you. What's the difference between writing the first and the second? Well, the first book is a little bit, it's got more lyric poetry in it, where the poems depend upon imagery and emotion to convey ideas. And the second book, I was at a different stage in my writing and my life. And it's much more conversational, it's much more confessional. I was simply in a different space of language with the second book. The first book came out in 2012, the second in 2021, so I had years to develop, to think differently about grief, to think differently about loss, and that certainly came across in the book and how the poems speak, mostly narratively.
Other questions?
Okay, I have another question. So I noticed that in your God letter poems, each of them has a different name, like at some point in like the dear section. So I was wondering, like, who are those people? What are their significance? And why did you end with God, but the second to last poem was to whom it may concern?
So when I was writing, before I started writing these poems, I began to have conversations with friends just off the cuff about their religious or spiritual practices. And the conversations were simply exploratory for me. I wanted to know what was going on in their lives, how their spirituality had evolved over time. And it was just out of interest. I wasn't reflecting back on my own beliefs necessarily. I wanted to know what they had been through so that I could write poems that were about these conversations between myself and friends. So there's one for my dear friend A. Van Jordan, who's a poet. There's one for one of my best friends, Sasha. And it just made sense in some of the latter ones to talk to God in the same way I talk to the liver. You know, just to say what needed saying to get all the emotions out. And, you know, I'm glad the poems were there to receive it. I certainly had a lot of feelings about God after my sister died, and those have, you know, changed in different ways throughout the years. But it feels very true to speak to these friends and to God and to offering up my own story about loss to anyone that wants to listen. So that's why that's to whom it may concern.
Other questions?
All right, our final question.
Hello. So this one is a bit of a very college tradition. If you would be so kind as to share your thoughts and opinions on Beyonce.
Oh my gosh. That was fun. Beyonce. Very talented. According to Jay-Z and Kanye West, does not get her due. No album of the year award